Good morning, Doug. Today we want to talk about the tricky business of predicting the future. And you have made a career out of predicting the future, made some mistakes along the way, certainly, but you've made some big, huge calls that have really worked out. And as a published author, your predictions are of the public record at this point. And so I'd like to talk about the predictions you made within this book that you published about 40 years ago now, called Crisis Investing, which the subtitle of that I believe was Opportunities and Profits in the Coming Great Depression. So what were the main predictions you made then, and what can we learn from that?
Well, I wrote that book in 1978. It's actually like 42 years old now. And it was published in 79, and it became a bestseller in 80, and actually sold most copies in 1981. And the reason I mention this is it's telling us something about the way these things work. In other words, when I wrote the book in 78, really very little of what I was predicting in the book had actually happened, or at least it had started to happen and the trend went a lot higher. But the public didn't start buying the book until 1980, which is when actually the opportunity had come and gone. So the public is always months or sometimes years behind actual events. So that's one thing about predicting the future that's kind of interesting. It's
Why do you think that is? That they're so far behind?
well, it's like the stock market. You know, nobody buys the stock market at the bottom because all they've heard for years, it's been going down before that, is, oh God, stocks are a disaster. I've lost so much money in stocks, stay away from stocks. So during a bear market, they've been hearing this for years. And, so by the time the absolute bottom comes and it's panic, and they figure, oh my God, I should have sold earlier. And then they really dump everything just about at the bottom. And it works in reverse too, where, the stock market starts picking up and doing a little bit better and so forth. And they don't believe it because things have been so bad for so long. And then after a bull trend is really established, and maybe it's getting overpriced, maybe they figure then, oh, okay, maybe it's human psychology, because the most dangerous thing in the market, I've found this, and everybody finds this, it's your own psychology. It's how you can second guess yourself and how your emotions overcome, any intellectual convictions you have, feelings over thoughts. So I guess it's like that in almost everything, but probably more in money than anything else that works that way.
So the book became a bestseller, a really big bestseller, like the best-selling book in America, or the best-selling nonfiction book in America, I believe it was, right?
It was. So a book about how to profit from the coming Great Depression became a bestseller after the worst elements of that downturn, that depression, had passed. It's absolutely perverse. So
Interesting.
I feel bad about it, but okay, that's just the way the world works. So then, to follow that up, I wrote a book. I wrote Strategic Investing. It was published in November 1982. And Strategic Investing it reached number 7 on the New York Times list. The New York Times list meant something in those days. Today, being a New York Times bestseller means very little because of the fact retail bookstores most of them have disappeared, and Amazon has taken over, and you can manipulate yourself to be a New York Times bestseller easily today. It was not possible in those days. Anyway, so Strategic Investing came out, and it was a stock market book. And it urged people to buy the old Nifty 50. I don't know how many people remember that, but during the 1960s, there were 50 stocks that were the equivalent of the FANG stocks today: Facebook, Amazon, Apple. They were the equivalent. They were called the Nifty 50. Buy these, you never go wrong. So, needless to say, those all collapsed by the early 80s. And, I said, oh, now it's time to buy the Nifty 50 because they're down like 85% or something like that. So I had a big chapter on that, big chapter on electrical utilities, which were yielding. People don't believe this, but it's easy to research. They just read the book. They were yielding an average of 15% in current dividends.
Amazing.
Yeah, 15% in current dividends. And of course, the stocks themselves were very cheap. And there was a bunch of other stuff on the stock market and everything. So that book did well, but it didn't do nearly as well because, the crisis was past. It's luck of the draw whether a book, whether you're right or not is one thing, but whether the public gloms onto it is another thing. But, I was reading this book over because I knew we were going to talk about this today. And that original crisis book, written in 1978, I was just reading it over before we got on the air. And being as intellectually honest as I can be, looking at your own stuff, which you've got obviously a vested interest in looking at with the rosiest possible glasses.
Of course, yeah.
It's actually pretty damn good. I mean, it's actually pretty, we could have gone over the edge totally back in 1979, 1980, but we didn't. But we could have.
What kept it from happening?
We should have, because if the whole system had washed out then, we would have. I like that coffee, if I may, Papa. That's very, very nice. Got a cup of coffee that magically arrived here. It's very sweet. We'd be much better off today. So
what saved the system then?
Would only be built because they immediately start rebuilding the House of Cards. It would only be 40 stories high as opposed to probably 70 stories now.
What was it, do you think, that saved the system back in 1979, 1980?
Actually, it was Paul Volcker. What Paul Volcker, who was the Secretary of the Treasury back then, did was, instead of having the Federal Reserve reduce interest rates to nothing where they are today, which is their current plan to save the world, he did just the opposite. He raised interest rates to 15%. Actually, I think the government was paying as much as 18% on T-bills at one point. Close, anyway. So, they were paying 15% on bonds at one point. So he did just the opposite of what they were doing today. Now, why was that smart, and why did that work? It worked because when interest rates are high, people don't want to borrow. And the problem is, when people borrow, that means they're living above their means. They don't have the money, so they borrow the money from somebody else, live above their means, because they can't afford it now. On the contrary, when interest rates are high, people want to save. And saving is all about producing more than you consume and saving the difference. And that's how you get wealthy. So, you have people like Trump saying, I'm a low interest rate guy. Well, I don't know. Are low interest rates good or high interest rates good? The market doesn't make moral judgments about high or low being good or bad. But the fact is that was Volcker's economic policies, not that the government should have any economic policies. I hasten to add that the market should determine these things. But he forced people to save, produce more than they consume. Those high interest rates were about. And those high interest rates also caused the collapse of a whole bunch of deadbeat companies, which was good. Why was that good? Because, their assets still existed. They were just sold, reallocated to other companies that could use them properly. Lots of managements were fired and so forth. So yeah, that was now, if that was done today, which it should be done, assuming the government should do anything, which it shouldn't, but that's a different question. It would make a much bigger mess now than it would have made back then, because the distortions and misallocations in the capital in the economy are much greater. So yeah, there's a lot of stuff, the welfare, everything. It would be a huge readjustment. I don't know what would happen today. Everything passes, of course, but
what do you think was the prediction that was most wrong in that book? What was the thing that was most off base in terms of timing or something else?
I assumed that the Depression would get worse from what it was. And when people think back, it was actually really risky and unpleasant. I mean, the stock market was the lowest it was by the time the bottom hit in 1982. It was as cheap in real terms as it was back in 1932, 50 years before at that point. And I thought, wow, it could get worse, because at the end of the book, I talked about, well, how bad can this get? And, I talked about, civilization could collapse. And I wasn't waving my hands or anything like that. I was just saying, look, let's look at the realistic possibilities. There's no guarantee that things are going to get better. And I pointed out, look at countries like Mao's China, because China was still there, and the Soviet Union. Things have been getting worse for them for decades. And they're going to continue getting worse. So we're heading in that direction. Yeah, it could happen to us. So I think I was too gloomy. But it depends upon your time frame, actually. Depends upon your time frame. I mean, things would look really gloomy during the Roman civil wars around the time of Caesar. But, they got better, and then they got a lot worse during the Dark Ages, and they got better during, we've both been reading Barzun's book on the decadence of the West. That is the name of it.
From Dawn to Decadence.
Exactly. And, he points out basically that the West seems to have reached a peak and is going downhill. Mm-hmm. So, and he's got, very well-based thoughts. So it's up and down and decline and fall. And, you can look at things like science fiction is really good this way. Like Isaac Asimov's Foundation trilogy. I mean, he's got, in the Foundation trilogy, he's got the planet Trantor, which is the head of the galactic empire, and the entire planet is covered with buildings. I mean, bumper to bumper buildings. I guess they're all made out of steel or something like that, skyscraper. They got to run a galaxy. And, a few thousand years later, he's got his heroes going back there, and the place is totally abandoned, like a Western ghost town. So anything can happen, quite frankly. There's no guarantees on the economy, just like in life itself. I mean, we don't need to have an asteroid hitting the Earth to wreck civilization. We can do it ourselves. So, I was too gloomy for too long. And strategic investing, I still thought things were going to get worse for civilization, but I thought the stock market was going to go up. And I recommended bonds, and I bought bonds myself, like long-term 30-year bonds with 12% coupons. So yeah, but I've got a reputation as a gloom and doom guy. Okay.
Hmm.
Yeah, I guess that's true because it just seems like Einstein was so right. He said uh, after hydrogen, the most common thing in the universe is stupidity. So that leaves room for a lot of ruin. But at the same time, I'm a believer that Ray Kurzweil is going to be right about the singularity, which has got to make you ultra optimistic, much more optimistic than most people can even imagine. So yeah, I've got this gloom and doom atmosphere because I just have no confidence in people, especially when they get together politically to do things. And here's the thing: it's that since about let's say, to pick a date, 1913, just before World War One, the whole world has become more and more politicized. And politics is actually the death of everything else. And politics has become much more and more and more important. So, that being the case, politics, being the real root cause of disaster, yeah, I think there's plenty of reason to be a super bear.
Hmm.
So that's how I justify it. So I think I was right about most of the things in the book. I just, I just didn't. Well, Adam Smith said this, and Milton Friedman's quoted it, and it's usually attributed to Milton Friedman, but it was actually Adam Smith. And Adam Smith said, "There's a lot of ruin in a country, so things that you expect to happen usually take longer than you think to happen." But this isn't Adam Smith, and this is me. But once they get underway, they happen much more quickly.
Hmm.
It's like it's like that quote from Hemingway. How do you go bankrupt? Well, slowly at first, then all at once,
All at once.
which is so true.
Hmm. Yeah, I think so. So the trends. I remember that as I was just reading a little bit about the book before this. Some of the things you anticipated. I think real estate prices going down. Um,
Yeah, I was a real estate bear. I was dead wrong about that. I think, you know, I read over my rationale for feeling that way. It's that real estate would be easy to tax, and real estate taxes would go up in
and they
percentage
have
terms. They have. And so it floats on a sea of debt. Well, yeah,
even more
but
so now than ever.
more than ever. But interest rates have gone way down from, when you were paying like 12% for a mortgage, believe it or not, back then, or even more, down to, what is it, 2% now.
Yeah,
That's helped a lot.
all time lows right now. Yeah.
Yeah. So, hey, listen, you make mistakes in the market. And like we were talking about yesterday, you got to know when to hold them, know when to fold them.
Yep.
But when it comes to real estate, I basically figured out, wait a minute, everybody's treating their house as an investment. It's not an investment. And I said this in the book. It's a consumer good, a
Yep.
long-lived one. It's like a car is a consumer good. It's not an investment. Yes, I know Ferraris have gone up 100 times and they cost millions of dollars. For a car that I own for $3,000 that car is worth $250,000 today. Yeah, but that's not an investment. It's a consumer good. I mean, it's like a long-lived toothbrush.
Mm.
If, you throw a toothbrush away after a month or so, and you throw a house away, the kind of houses they build today, after, I don't know, 50 years or so. Okay.
Yeah. Real estate is like a long lived toothbrush. That's good.
Yeah, I think that's true.
So I agree. I mean, definitely. I remember hearing you say something, talking about housing as a consumer item, not an investment in the mid or in the early 2000s as a real estate boom was really taking off. And it helped me recognize the insanity that was going on around me because, I'd never been through a real estate boom like that before. I don't know if many people have, but seeing it as a consumer item and see the way it was becoming overly financialized, where people were doing, the all these loan shenanigans around them too. Where there's no income verification required. People owning multiple properties, people trying to induce me to go in with them on all these different real estate investments. It's understanding that it was a consumer item, or at least having that in the back of my head to counteract all of the mania that was going on around me, like definitely saved me from getting involved in a number of deals that I would have been crushed by. So that's true.
Yeah, well, the time to buy real estate and is, when nobody can afford it because they've lost all their money, and nobody wants it and everybody's afraid of it. So is that going to come up now? Is that going to come up next? Well, I don't know. Real estate in the big cities, like, is New York going to come back? Yeah, I guess it's going to come back on some level, but I don't know. I mean, maybe not. The city government is bankrupt. Okay, they need money. They're going to try to extract it from businesses. A lot of restaurants have gone out of business. That capital has really wiped out the guy that owned the restaurant. I mean, he's in trouble. What's he going to do? Is he going to go back to New York and take a? I don't know. I'm not sure they will. I mean, with people doing Zoom all the time, I mean, why do you want to fight the traffic and commute into Manhattan? I mean, I'm not saying New York is going to be like in that great Kurt Russell movie, Escape from New York, which I think is really quite a good movie, quite frankly. But yeah, it could get ugly. People forget that Rome was the biggest city in the world, from roughly the time of Caesar to about 200. It was about 1 million people, I guess. And by the year 500, certainly by the year 600, there were pigs wandering around the forum, and there were a couple thousand people, that were hanging out, growing vegetables, and, stealing rocks from the old buildings to build huts. So things can change.
What do you see as, what do you think are the keys, the things that you've learned about making predictions since you first published that book? I mean, you were a young man. You're in your early 30s, I think, at the point when you had that book published. And
that was a great time to have a best-selling book, and yeah, it was really pretty rich, I got to admit. Well, one thing I've learned is if you're going to predict, it's long been said, but it's so true, I found. If you're going to predict often. And well, that seemed, yeah, okay. But why is that true? Because predictions are forgotten. Most of them are forgotten after time. But if you predict often, you're going to be right on some of them. And you point to those to show how smart you were. So, yeah, that's certainly true. It's dishonest, but it's true. I prefer not to do that because I got to live with myself primarily. And actually, I don't give a damn what the public thinks. Vanderbilt was right when somebody pointed out to him that they were saying nasty things about him. And Vanderbilt said, let the public be damned. And that's kind of the way I feel. I mean, it's when you're dealing with people as individuals, that's one thing. But when you're dealing with masses of them, it's something else entirely. It's like dealing with a herd of cattle or something like that. So yeah. I don't care what they think, as long as they don't attack en masse and tear you limb from limb, which is always a risk in times like these, of course.
Certainly seems so. It's a little easier, I guess, when you're in when you spend your time across many different time zones in many different countries. It's a little easier for them to hunt you down en masse.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. I mean, is it going to come to that? Not for me, but for, let's say, people that are perceived as enemies of the state in general. Wouldn't be the first time.
No, it wouldn't. I mean, in fact, I'd say this is common. This is pretty pretty common actually when there's a change, a massive change in public sentiment or political control, right? That you look for scapegoats.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, absolutely correct. Especially the kind of people that have the psyche that many of the Antifa and BLM people and similar groups do today. It's very much the same type of psyche that that ruled France in 1793 after the revolution got underway. Or it's a Bolshevik kind of psyche where they actually want to hunt down people.
The Red Guard in the Cultural Revolution, right?
Perfect example. Yes, on a nationwide scale and a big fat nation, not just a little one. Of course, little ones can be dangerous too. You look what happened with Pol Pot in Cambodia, where it's said that he killed a third of all the people in the country or something like that. Nobody knows.
Yeah.
I mean, things can get out of control.
Things can get out of control. So what's the so in the prediction game? I want to get back to like what you've learned from predictions, predicting then versus now, and then I think maybe some of your predictions around the economy and around these social collapse or things falling out of control. I'd like to, I guess, see what predictions I might be able to get out of you now about that. But first, again, what you've learned in predicting over the years. So you predict often, obviously.
Yeah. I'm not sure. I guess the best thing you can do about predicting is just read a lot of what other people have said and learned and the facts and try to put them together logically and rationally and come to a conclusion. That's all anybody can do, quite frankly. So can we really learn anything? Well, who was it? I think I'm quoting an awful lot of aphorisms today.
That's good.
Who was it that said the only thing that we learn from history is that we don't learn anything from history?
Yeah. I don't remember who said that, but yeah, that's great.
Yeah, and there really seems to be a lot of truth to that. I mean,
how much do you see now versus in your 30s, your predictions much more on a scale of probabilities versus as I know when I was in my early 30s, I was much more likely to assume binary outcomes. It's going to go one way or the other, and versus this more probabilistic approach to predicting the future, because there are all kinds of if you're simulating lots of information from different places and forming your own conclusion, it's still very hard to be certain or to assume it's going to go one way or the other. But instead, this probabilistic basis, I guess, of prediction. How much more oriented toward that now are you?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, of course. So it's not like history is a dilemma. It's going to go this way or that way. Sometimes history goes between the horns of the dilemma and the thesis and the antithesis, and you get a synthesis. Marxists like that. They like to use that a lot.
Exactly.
So I don't know. I mean, this is why I like science fiction so much, because with science fiction, you can knock the shackles off, break the concrete around your mind and just figure out that, listen, I've long been a solipsist, and a solipsist, there are a lot of varieties of solipsism, but basically solipsism says anything that you can imagine is possible. And actually, I believe that. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And if you can imagine it, it's possible. And there are actually some indications through astrophysics and things like that. Yeah, that's true. It's like this this construct. Who's the physicist that came up with this? That has said that the entire world is a simulation.
Nick Bostrom, I think.
Yes, and we're not only living in a simulation, but a simulation within a simulation within a simulation. And Chinese philosophers dealing with this problem long before they had physics to play with said, well, what's holding up the earth? And the Chinese philosopher said, a turtle. Well, what's the turtle standing on? He said, it's turtles all the way down. Oh, actually, he was right.
Yeah. Yeah. I think the idea, so that if anything we can imagine is the limits of our imagination is the limits of what might happen, then then expanding our imaginations is one of the keys to being able to predict the future. And I often found with myself when I'm trying to speculate about what might happen. And I think about the election and stuff that's happened with it recently. I thought, uh, I'm just not cynical enough. I'm not cynical enough to think that, to imagine that, fraud would occur at the level maybe that it is occurring. That the shenanigans would be played the way they are. And, but that's a limit of my own imagination rather than my ability to be able to rationally predict the future, because it seems like why wouldn't this happen? Why wouldn't they play dirty tricks? I mean, you have to imagine they've been played forever in different ways.
Yeah, anything that can happen that you can imagine actually eventually probably will happen. I mean, this is another like a little meme in physics. It's that, eventually if you wait long enough, I mean, 747 will be assembled just out of random atoms. I mean, if you have infinite time and infinite space, yeah, that'll eventually happen. There'll be some atoms that come together, so sure. And that's why science fiction is so great, because there you got somebody that's structuring, a logical continuum of how things could develop. So it's a really underrated area of literature. And incidentally, the literati, the type of people that write the kind of books that are reviewed by the New York Times and the New York Review of Books, they generally hate science fiction, actually.
Yeah.
It's very interesting. So I really dislike most of the current literati, the type that hang out in New York cafes and
well, they don't hang out in New York cafes anymore, Doug. So that's one upside of the pandemic.
We got to look at the bright side. You're right.
We have to. So let's talk about some predictions. I mean, I think you're really great at these predictions. In my mind, even with the election, you said Biden, and you called the reason why Biden would win. You gave lots of big reasons. You gave 6 reasons in total, and the 6th reason is that you thought it would all come down to cheating, and the Democrats are historically much better at cheating. And
yeah, that's right.
It's not fully settled yet, but it certainly looks like Biden will win. And there's a lot of shenanigans that took place in order to get there. So, yeah. Right on that prediction. So looking here where we are right now, how would you first focus your mind on a specific prediction? Would you focus on something like the stock market or something? I mean, the great thing about election is it does focus your mind, and you can then, develop a hypothesis, I guess, about how the future might unfold. If you're trying to imagine what the world is like 12 months from now, where do you first focus your mind to sort of form that prediction?
Well, I'm a top-down kind of guy. Whether that's smart or not, I'm not sure. Some ways, it's better to be a bottom-up kind of guy where, you look at little things on the ground and you put them together, as opposed to top-down. You look at big trends and big history and stuff like that, and then figure out how that applies. So you can go either bottom up or top down. And they're both very valid. And of course, it's best if you can do both together and you come to a common conclusion. But I'm just wired to tend to look at things from a top-down point of view. So what's likely to happen now? Well, I think the inevitable is becoming the imminent. And I thought that it was true when I wrote Crisis Investing back in '78. And it is true. I mean, I think all the big predictions I made in that I'm talking about fluctuations in the stock market or the direction of interest rates. I mean, I should take this opportunity to tell you one of my favorite jokes about interest rates. Do you know this one?
I do not.
Oh, you're going to like this. So, talking about predicting. So, so Einstein dies and goes to heaven. He's greeted by St. Peter. St. Peter says, "Oh, we're so pleased to see you, Mr. Einstein. What a pleasure, etc., etc." Unfortunately, since we're a centrally planned economy here in heaven for obvious reasons, we have a temporary housing shortage. But until we get your own digs put together, maybe you wouldn't mind rooming with 3 other guys for a while. So Einstein says, "Sure." So he goes to meet his new roommates. And first guy comes up to him and says, "Mr. Einstein, I'd love to get to know you. I have an IQ of 130, and I'd just like to get to know you." So Einstein says, "Oh, well, that's very good. After lunch, let's toss around a few concepts of astrophysics that have been on my mind." Fine. Second guy comes up to him and says, "Mr. Einstein, I also want to get to know you, but I'm not as smart as that first guy. I've only got an IQ of 100, but I still want to get to know you." So Einstein says, "Oh, good. Well, let me put my grip away and let's play a game of chess." Third guy comes up to him and says, "Mr. Einstein, I'm not as smart as the 2 guys. I've only got an IQ of 70, but I still want to get to know you." So Einstein says, "So where do you think interest rates are going?" and, and, it's so true. Anyway, I got off on a tangent, but that is a good joke.
So you said the inevitable is becoming imminent in terms of the economy.
Yeah, exactly. So I think the trend that's clearly been in motion since just before the First World War, and it was clearly in motion when I wrote that book in 1978, it's accelerating rapidly at this point. And you can see it by the fact that apparently, who the hell knows, but let's say about half the country actively supports Biden and Kamala Harris and people like that. And so, yeah, the trend is accelerating rapidly at this point. And the fact is that the US government is running such gigantic deficits now, it can't even remotely cover them, not even remotely with tax revenue. It's got to print up money. So, yeah, we're actually on the edge of the precipice. And yeah, I thought we were close to it back in 78, but we really are close to it now. Can the government pull out another? Can the government pull out another cycle out of this? Well, back in 2008, when the housing crisis happened, I mean, who would have thought that they would have printed up trillions of dollars back then? It seemed outrageous, but they did it. Who would have thought they would have reduced interest rates to 0? Okay, they shot that arrow. So What other possible arrows do they have in their quiver? Because the prime directive of all living things is survive. And that goes for the US government. The US government as an entity wants to survive. So how's it going to do that? Well, it's going to have to garner resources. So, okay, interest rates low, they're destroying the currency. I don't know what they can do. I mean, steal wealth wholesale from the middle class, people that are not members of the deep state. Hey, that's no more outrageous than what they did starting in 2008 or other governments have done throughout history. So yeah, I mean, if you look at the logical possibilities, I mean, are they going to do these? I put a list together of the 7 things that I would do if I was the dictator and I didn't care if anybody tried to kill me, you know, and I didn't care about reordering everything, which I don't want to do because it's just, you know, that's too many problems with that from every point of view. But they're not going to do that. They're not going to do the right thing because these people. Was in the days of Isaac Newton. And yeah, general standard of living is going to fall. And we're going to have the 20s is going to be the worst decade since the 30s and the 40s. It's going to be much worse than the 30s and the 40s for all kinds of reasons. Yeah, I think it's going to be scary. And right now, we're kind of like, you know, we're entering the trailing edge of the hurricane, but it's, you know, people are distracted now, not too worried at the moment. I think it's, hey, listen, I'll go on record as saying it's going to be so bad, it's going to be worse than even I think it's going to be.
Can you, what's besides the reduction in standard of living, which it seems like that's a clear and obvious way that regardless of, you know, what the U.S. has done to prop up the economy or to keep it all from going off the rails, like that's happened. The standard of living for the average American is clearly reduced from, you know, basically since you know, the 1950 or so. It's just been a constant, a near constant decline in the standard of living for people. So, and certainly since you wrote the book, that's only proved to be true.
Yeah, I mean, if only because back in those days, it used to be one guy could work at a job and bring home the bacon and the family had a nice standard. Now both the husband and the wife have to work in order to keep their heads above water. And that's kind of like a really broad indicator.
Yeah, I think so. But what is there any can you think of a concrete example that sometime within the next, let's just say, if we say the 2020s are going to be, you know, worse than even you can imagine, what is some event that will that or some scene that we will see during this period that is a good representation of how bad it will be? Like, what are some of the, you know, like I mean, like going back to you know, you predicted the 2001 terrorist attack on you know, on the World Trade Center. I mean, fairly accurate, like the players involved, and I mean, like that was
why didn't the FBI stop by and visit me? That would have been entertaining. I like visits from FBI agents. I mean, I've had a couple of visits from FBI agents, but not about that. But yeah, just shows how incompetent they are. Actually, I planned the whole thing.
so tell me, like, what, so give me, I'm looking for something like that from you. Like what's something that we'll witness or experience over the next, you know, several years that'll be indicative of the time that we're living in?
I think China is definitely going to have something to do with it. I don't see China as an enemy. I don't, you know, view them that way. But if a country is about to fly apart, and the U.S. is on the edge of flying apart, which would be a good thing, incidentally, if it's a peaceful separation in the form of a secession, you know, Washington is going to want to unite the country. That's always looked on as a good thing for some reason. So I think there's going to be a serious dust up with China. I really do. I think you can almost plan your life around that. So that's one thing. And that's going to be a big deal and really, really dangerous and completely unpredictable as far as who wins or loses and how much capital is destroyed. So that's one thing I'd plan my life around. And I think there's going to be chaos in the financial markets because the financial markets are totally distorted with trillions of dollars being created in Washington and other currency units in other countries. So, I mean, yeah, maybe it's smart to be long the stock market now because it's going up. But, is it smart to listen? I guess I'm a chicken. And I figure, why should I be in the stock market now anyway? Because actually, gold mining stocks, which have always been my specialty, it's a crappy 19th century choo-choo train business. Yeah, it's true. I understand that. But, I know something about them, and I can tell you they're really, really cheap right now, and they're going to be the next bubble. So that's another thing I'll predict. Stock market's going to be chaotic. The bond market has got to be devastated. I don't see there's any way around that. And since the bond market's much bigger than the stock market, that's going to be serious. A lot of people think they have lots of assets in the form of bonds. So what happens when those bonds default or interest rates go way up or the currency that they're denominated in goes way down? There's going to be some unhappy people. So I think it's all going to happen this decade. So those are three big predictions. And I hope that if we have this conversation 10 years from now, I'm dead wrong. But I don't think I will be, quite frankly.
I don't think so either. It seems like all of these things seem incredibly likely to happen probably within the first half of the 2020s, even rather than the latter half.
Yeah. And another thing that's going to happen is, history does kind of repeat. I mean, everybody knows that. And, when the going gets tough, especially now, the way people have been accustomed to thinking that the state can fix everything. And, it's like a cornucopia. So we'll get a strong man of some type that, will claim to kiss everything and make it better. So whether he's elected or whether there's some kind of force majeure that puts him in charge, I'd put a money bet on that too. So this is really unpleasant. So where do you go and hide? I don't want to go out into the deep woods and live under a rock. That's no fun. But I don't want to be in a big city either. I think that's a bad idea at this point, to be in a big city.
I think so too. Yep, I think so too. I mean, yeah, it's hard to understand the time frame of, I guess, like you were saying, Adam Smith was saying, the country's really big, so things take a lot longer than you expect, and they don't unravel in exactly the way you expect. So even if there is a serious, as you said, dust up with China, what will it actually mean for, the average life of the average American? I mean, it's maybe very little at first. Who knows? But or it could mean a ton. It's hard to know. So it's hard to really de-risk your life from that. Although I think recognizing the risks that you have in your life is probably the right place to start. Like you said, with the stock market, I mean, it's really high right now. How much higher could it realistically go versus how much lower could it realistically go? And just understanding your risks appropriately, I think.
Yeah, exactly. And there's simple things too, like we really rely on electricity for what we're doing right now and to heat and cool the house and run everything. And so if I was the Chinese or the American government attacking the Chinese, because they'll both do this, you'll try to take down the other guy's grid. And that's there's a number of ways of doing that.
Yep.
So it's going to happen. And that's going to be really inconvenient,
Devastating. I think people have no idea how dependent they are on electricity. I think people's understanding of it is of the basic technologies that get us, out of living in the dirt to living at the standard of living we have today are just so poorly understood by most people, and they don't understand when you lose that top layer of technology, even how difficult it is to rebuild it back up, to that level.
Yeah, it really is. I mean, if the guys that know how to fix these things go away, well, who's going to fix them? I mean, if they just decide they're going off elsewhere, not going to go to work anymore because they're not getting a paycheck that clears. I mean, you go to apparently it's the case that a lot of kids in the inner city think that milk is manufactured and comes out of a carton. They really think that. I've heard that. Maybe it's true. I don't know. But, no electricity, no milk, no ice cream. I mean, no food. Forget about milk and ice cream. No food, because it's got to be brought in from the farms after being processed, and it's got to be brought in trucks. This is a very, very complex chain of distribution. And it could be tenuous if the government destroys the currency, which they're well on the way to doing. I mean, you don't even know how to pay people to trade and everything. And it's more or less unfathomable. So you got to read sci-fi. There's a guy who's become a friend of mine recently named James Kunstler, and he wrote a series of books, which I'm starting to read now, called, let me get it right, A World Lit Only by Firelight. Anyway, Google Kunstler and buy those books. He's a very good writer, and it's a good kind of discussion of what happens when things fall apart. Post-apocalyptic, if you would, but this can happen.
There was a series of books I read a couple of years ago. I'm sure you remember the Ted Koppel, the newsman, was on ABC Nightline for a long time. He wrote a nonfiction book about the risks of EMPs, and in this, I always grew up where I thought Ted Koppel was a very credible source, So I read it, and it scared the crap out of me. I can't remember what the book was called. It's like Lights Out or something like that. But then he refers to a series of a novel called 1 Second After. I can't remember who the author of that is, but it is. I mean, they just basically recount exactly what happens when an EMP, whether it be whether it's, I think in the story it was North Korea who caused it, but whether they come from a foreign adversary or it be a solar flare or something, and how it just sends the world back into the dark ages, basically immediately. And it is terrifying. And you realize like how ill prepared we are as a society, as our skills today, how poorly suited they are to a world where we actually have to work with atoms and build things from the ground up again, as opposed to live in the world of digits that we've become accustomed to.
Actually, it's funny you mentioned that, and even that we're talking about this, because before I head back to South America, bring a bunch of books down there with me. I don't like to read things on Kindle. I prefer paper. And I've got a couple of books on nuclear war that I selected off the vast Amazon list. I'm looking forward to reading them and learning some technical details, whether the authors interpret the economic and social and financial consequences of these various nuclear war scenarios properly. It doesn't matter. I'm interested in the technical knowledge they'll have, and I'll bring you up to date on the books that I'm reading. Anyway,
I look forward to hearing it and hearing how you adapted to your predictions of the 2020s. So what we have, just to recap your predictions here, that there will be a serious dust up with China. Difficult to say what form that takes, but it will be serious. Certainly in chaos in the financial markets and the bond market in particular, it's in a really, really bad position. And the U.S. will elect or appoint a strongman as leader at some point.
Yeah, I think that covers the military and the financial and the political. Yeah, okay. So I'll stick with the broad predictions.
All right.
And hope I'm wrong, because it'll be very unpleasant, and I expect to be personally inconvenienced if I'm right.
No doubt. These will definitely be inconvenient if any of these happen. No doubt about it.
Yes, for sure.
for any of the readers who are watchers here, if you have any predictions yourself for what you think will happen in the 2020s, anything specific, just add them to the comments, and I'll make sure I go through them with Doug, or he's aware of them, so we can maybe add to his thinking on it. And also, if you have any questions, please submit them in the comments too. Every Friday we do a Q&A, and it's usually one of our most popular episodes we do. So leave your questions, and I will set them aside and ask Doug on Friday.
Oh, and one other thing. We're putting together a report on a bunch of financial and investment things. So it'll be done tomorrow, I guess. And don't have a title for it because it's not quite done, but it'll be done tomorrow. And it'll be okay. So if you'd like that report, just tell us and we'll send it to you.
Yeah, there's a link. There's a link in the description where you can sign up, put your email address for notifications. So just go ahead and do that, and then we'll make sure that you get sent this report.
Okay. And listen, I do want to twist everybody's arm. I mean, probably since we've been talking 40 minutes now, we've only got like probably 5 or 10 people listening still.
Maybe.
But go out and get a copy of Assassin, because I'm reading the book now in paper, which I haven't had a chance to do. And it's a hell of a good book, and it covers all kinds of really interesting stuff. So go to Amazon and get a copy of Assassin. Got to put the commercial in there.
You got to put the commercial in there. And that also, there'll be a link to all Doug's books on Amazon in the description. But Assassin is the newest in the series of novels. It's the best of the 3 so far, and I definitely encourage people to go buy it.
Super.
Right. Thanks, Doug. We'll talk tomorrow.
Thanks, Matt. See you then.